switch it over. Just want to remind everyone that today's session will be recorded. We are on our 7th web session. I can't believe we're over halfway through cohort. This is so exciting. Today, behind the mic, you have, today we have Amanda Van Lancher with QIC, Quantum Consulting. She's going to be talking about doing something with data, taking a deeper dive into learners, usability, and effectiveness. Then we'll dive into our team updates using our GitHub page. Currently, right now, we have 618 folks registered for cohort. Next week after DevLearn, be prepared for this number to increase. There's going to be a lot of folks interested coming and looking at your teams in Slack and making sure that and wanting to check out cohort. So be prepared for that increase in participants. Behind the mics, you have myself, Jessica Jackson. I'm an instructional designer. Megan is here with me. She says hello. Aaron and Jamie are our production team, making sure everything runs smoothly, so thanks to them. So if you're just new to cohort, we are in the 7th week. We started out learning broadly what xAPI was and what it could do, presented by Megan. Then we learned about sending data using e-learning tools and non-e-learning tools. We talked about receiving data, learning about an LRS, an LMS, and the LXP and new learning architecture. Last week we learned about profiles, and today we're going to do something with data and take a deeper dive into learners, usability, and effectiveness. Next week we're going to get a state of the industry from Megan, and I'm going to pass it over to her so she can tell us what to expect.
So next week I'm going to be at DevLearn, and a bunch of people here are going to be at DevLearn. And what we do from DevLearn for cohort is pretty much wild and crazy. So what I'm going to do is go through the expo and talk to some of the vendors and some of the people who are at DevLearn and find out what's going on. It gets pretty crazy. It's a load of fun. If you're going to be at DevLearn, plan to meet us at the end of the hour. So it's the end of whatever, 2 to 3 o'clock Eastern, translate into Mountain Time, so noon till 1. So close to 1, we'll be wrapping up and be back at the Torrance Learning booth, which will be cohort central for that. And we'll get to say a quick hello. And Patty, it is absolutely off the charts. It's pretty silly and fun, and generally draws a big scene. But my job is to, between now and then, find all the companies and vendors that are doing something with xAPI at DevLearn and get them in on this. So it'll be super fun. Those of you who have watched it in the past, you're going to be so excited to know that we have a professional microphone this time, and it will not be people barking into my cell phone.
Thanks, Megan. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Amanda and let her take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you, Amanda.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Amanda. I'm a research psychologist at Quantum Improvements Consulting, and I'm going to talk today about some of the ways that we are using xAPI data to understand more about our learners, about what they're doing as they're moving through a learning system, and then whether that can help us understand how to design and update the system going forward. So starting from a perspective that we are building a learning ecosystem that is meant to be adaptive and iterated on, can we learn something about how people are navigating the system to make it even better? So I'm going to talk not even so much today about performance or tracking performance over time or interoperability. Those sort of use cases are well established. I'm going to talk a little bit more about other ways that we can use xAPI data to understand what people are doing really well. And as I mentioned, we're interested here really in the usability of the system and the effectiveness at learning, and how we can use that to sorry, for reading. I gotta just look at my slides. How we can use that to make a better system. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk through a specific sort of case study about a mobile application and the way that we are using xAPI data. I had a question about my research psych degree. I have a PhD in cognitive science from Louisiana State University. After that, I did a postdoc in cognitive neuroscience at North Dakota State University before coming to QIC. So you'll probably see that a lot. I definitely have a psychology mind and not a developer mind. So I'm going to be able to speak to that part of the API much better. So in looking at how we can use data to understand people a little bit better, I've seen two approaches that people take. One is that you start with a set of data and try to know what can I learn from what I have. A different approach, which is the one that we took, and I'm going to point out specific cases where it could be really important to do this, is to know, if you know in advance, what information do I really need to know, and then what data do I need to answer those questions? And if you can think through that process in advance, it's going to be a lot easier to get the data you need from the xAPI statements. So I'm going to talk through that a little bit. So the case that I'm going to talk about is a mobile application meant to be part of training for service members in financial literacy. Financial literacy is just now part of training that service members will go through. This application is not meant to replace that. It's meant as a supplement. So there are certain points in time that service members might undergo training, and this application is meant to assist in that training. Now, the way that it's set up leads to some interesting questions for us. It is not set up in the type of scenario where you have serial lessons that you go through to complete a course. It is micro-learning content, so you have small bits of information that are just really relevant to what you need at any given point in time. It doesn't have a linear structure, which opens some really interesting questions about how people are actually using the application. Let's see. So there's two general questions I'm going to get at here. Is the application usable and is it effective? And there's some sub-questions, right? Can you find what you're looking for? How are you getting to content? Are you learning information that's relevant to you specifically? Do people access some types of content together? To give you a general idea of these are the types of questions that we are interested in right now with this application, and that you can get from the xAPI data. And I'm going to show you some examples of questions that we're interested in and how we're tackling it using xAPI data. So I'm going to show you some examples. I'm going to go through a few questions we're interested in, how we're addressing it with xAPI data, and then some preliminary data of how it starts to look. So you can sort of see the process of, going from what you want to know to looking at the results. But just a statement about these data. These are from beta testers during a 1-month release. It's about 89 people. They may not be representative of our end users. So right now, a lot of the people beta testing it are financial counselors who are going to recommend or not recommend the application to service members rather than the service members themselves. So this is not meant to be like, these are how people are using our app. It's really more about, here's the types of information we are starting to gather and how we're going about gathering it. Just to sort of spark some ideas of different ways that you can use the xAPI data and to really show that there's a lot of rich information in there that you can use to answer a lot of different types of questions. So some of the questions that I'm going to go through today, we have a lot more questions we're interested in, but I'm targeting a few going from sort of simple to more complicated questions, and then how you can target different parts of the xAPI statement to address them. So I'm going to start off with who is using the application. So as I mentioned, this is an application geared towards service members and their families, but it is meant to help assist service members along the entire stage of their career, including veterans. The service members themselves might not be handling their finances, it might be their family members. So we're really interested in who is using the application, what service, status, if they're active duty or not, if they're family member, rank, age, that sort of information. So to gather this information, I'm just going to show you. What we have is, let's use my cursor here. Within the application, people can go through this optional profile, and it asks questions like what describes you, if you're active duty status, it asks what birth year you were born in, what branch of the military. So it's just a simple questionnaire. And getting this data is pretty straightforward. We've set up a question activity type, so we can just search for questions, and then we can just pull their response, just a natural part of this xAPI question, and use that to get information about who is using the application. So in this case, we have, you can see a higher percentage of DoD civilians, likely because these are the financial counselors. As this gets released publicly, we would expect to see an increase in the relative users that are active duty. But if this is not the case, that'll tell us something important about who's using the application and whether it's targeting the people it's supposed to target. And similarly, what branch of service they're in. This is something that's important to us and both as a customer to understand who's using it. Do we need to target specific service members of a specific branch because they're not getting access to it? Do we need to adjust the marketing campaign? That sort of thing. The next two questions I'm going to address together. They're sort of related, right? So for any particular person, how often are they using the application and how much of the content are they accessing, right? So what's really important to hear is that people continue to use the application over time to make sure that they are continuing to engage and continuing to learn. If this is what you get a lot of times with usage data, is you might get how many people have downloaded it or how many people have registered, but we're really interested in sustainment over time. Do people continue to use the application on their own? And this is just starting, I'm going to start with some real low-hanging fruit here and talk a little bit more about more complicated ways we could look at this as well. So just in terms of what are we using the xAPI statement for any statement, we can just go to the actor field and get the name. Obviously, we just have random strings of numbers and digits to protect people's privacy, but they're unique for each person. And then we can get the timestamps of this statement. And that allows us to determine how many days each learner is using the application. So for this particular set of people, we have a pretty strong bias to the 1 to 4 days, and then they discontinue use. This, again, is probably a byproduct of the fact that this is a beta release with financial counselors. They are likely checking out the application, deciding if they think it will be useful, but they are not in a position where they are trying to learn a lot of information over time. They are really the people helping service members. And then similarly, how much content are people accessing? So we want to know, are people using the entire application? Are they only accessing a few pieces of content and discontinuing use? Understanding if people are using it a lot or if they are using it a little and then stopping usage will really give us some good information on, is the application engaging enough? Does it have information that people find useful? Are they willing to continue to use the application? So this can be really useful for us when it comes to designing and developing the application going forward. And so here, the parts of the statements I have, we went to the object type. So for a particular lesson, we have an activity type of a lesson, and I can also get the type and name to help me find all statements for all of the unique lessons. And then again, the actor name so that I can identify for each person how many unique lessons is that person accessing. And what we see here is that about the 1 to 20 range is how many lessons most people are accessing. For the beta testers, again, they might be opening the application, checking out a couple lessons, seeing if they can understand it and close it. What we can do in the future going forward is we have a wider release. We can see how many lessons are people looking at per day. Are people accessing the application once, doing a few lessons, closing it, and then coming back to it the next time they need to know something? Or are they accessing several lessons in a row over several days and treating it more like a traditional course, right? So how are people really treating the questions here? Treating the content here. I'm getting the sample size and number of days when we exclude financial counselors. Right now, we can't really exclude financial counselors because this is the beta test. So what we could do in the future as it is widely released is restrict whose data we're looking at. So this profile question, for example, we could look at only active duty service members or only family of service members and exclude DoD civilians or treat them separately. And that can really help us get at how are different types of learners using the application that are different from each other. So that would be really interesting to know going forward. And this is just, moving forward, a small sample of how we are going to continue to dig at these questions. I'm tending to start broad, right? Like, how many lessons are people looking at? But then we want to go further, right? So we're interested particularly in branch of service, rank, duty status. So are there certain types of learners that are more likely to access the application more often? So are family members more likely to use the application a lot than service members? And that could suggest to us that, maybe we really need to develop content that's related to family members. And so knowing this information about how it's using it, people are using it, and how they're using it can really help us develop the content in a way that is most effective and that people can get the most out of it. And then things like, does the type of lessons that people are accessing predict whether people are going to use it a lot? So we have from very basic information like this is what cash flow is, this is what a checkbook is, to more complicated information about estate planning that's going to be specific to a certain point in people's life, right? So do we see that maybe people who access basic finance are more interested in learning and they use a lot of the application? Or we might see that people who are interested in basic finance don't really go into detail about some of the more complicated information. And getting at the root of why that is, we can do a lot of iterative work where we can look through this data and find out, what are people doing? And then if we get in front of end users and sort of ask them about what their pain points are and what could make things better. Okay, the next question that I'm going to talk about here is what parts of the content are people accessing? This is something that I can see pretty well in our LRS. So some of the questions we've talked about so far, just to touch on this point, probably does require a little bit of coding experience to get at, or it's something, but any of it is something that could be pretty easily integrated into an LRS. So which part are they accessing? I'm going to point out how we're getting it and then launch into some of the more complicated questions we have aside from just what lessons are people reading. So for this example, I just want to know, for a given lesson, which lessons are being completed? This is a pretty basic question, right? So I can, once again, dig down into my object type and find lessons. I can get the unique name of that lesson, and then I can get its status. So in this particular case, I'm interested in lessons that have been completed, and I can get that from the verb part of my xAPI statement. And so if you're just interested generally, sorry, the background of this of this logo came out a little funky. But if you're just interested generally in what lessons are people completing a lot and what are they not completing a lot, this can be useful just from a point of, are they accessing information that has been known to be a pain point in the past? So in this point, we're getting cash flow, why you should check your LES. That's really important, your leave and earning statement, basically your paycheck. What is a spending plan? Also important. Fewer people looking at changes to entitlements. Again, what people are looking at will probably change a little bit as we get different groups of users. But then one thing that we want to think about is a piece of content accessed a lot because it's really important to people? So it's a big pain point. Maybe I don't understand cash flow. Or is it accessed a lot because its relative location was in the application? So our application, like I said, it's microlearning. It's not linear. You can go through it in any order you want. People tend to read left to right. You get a lot of direction of attention to things on the left. So maybe something is looked at a lot because it is the first piece of content. Maybe it is looked at a lot because it is particularly important. So as we're looking at, what are people looking at, we want to try to get it to what are the reasons why this might be. Now, if we notice that people look a lot at things that are at the beginning, can we capitalize on that and front load information that's either known to be difficult for service members or adapt the course so that stuff that is likely to be information for this particular person, load that up to the front for them. Or if we see that particular content is accessed a lot because it's relatively important, can we target that content, now knowing what people see is important, target that content for future development in the future, So as we expand content and make the application more comprehensive, then can we target parts of the application that are important to people for that development? Another thing that we're interested in here with what are people accessing is relative completion versus experience. So within a given lesson, people can open the lesson, look through part of it, and then leave if they choose to do so. And then what might that say, right? So even though cash flow is completed a lot, as an example, if people look at why you should check your leave and earning statement, they're much more likely to complete that lesson. So does that suggest something to us about that lesson's relative importance or pain for the service members? We do happen to know that the LES can be difficult for people to understand sometimes. So if people are completing this content a lot relative to how often they're opening it, that might suggest that it's particularly important. Likewise, if people are not completing content, that might suggest some content could be good targets for us to change in the future, right? Is something too long? Is it less relevant? Is it simply being opened a lot because of its location? We should sort of leave it alone. So it can open a lot of doors to how to change the development in the future. Okay. And then again, going forward with this same sort of like, what are people accessing, right? We're also interested in digging deeper. Is it affected by rank or branch of service? I'm going to touch point in a second. I'll skip the second one. I've talked already about which lessons people are accessing the most. What about amount of time? What if people spend more time on content? What if they revisit it more than once? Okay, this is a good question. How do you plan and select the questions that you want to answer? xAPI tends to gather a lot of data, a lot of number of questions, right? This is a good point that bring up at the end, but I'll touch on it again here. We are asking these questions because we are particularly interested in expanding the content. I'm going to give an example about why we're interested in the structure. We're interested in usability and effectiveness. So based on that, we got together and thought, what we really want to know is what are people looking at a lot? What are they not looking at a lot? Because we decided that was important to us as an organization. Some of the questions I'm about to talk to are particularly important to our customer. That can help drive some of the research questions. So there is a lot that you can get from the xAPI data. And there's also flexibility in the way you create the statements. So I'm going to talk a little bit too about how knowing what you want in advance can be really useful in making sure you get the data that you want. So these questions happen to be important to us because of what our end goals are. But depending on what your end goals are, you might have totally different questions. So one question that we were particularly interested in was how are people getting to lessons? And there's a reason for this. So I'm going to give you some context. But essentially, we're interested in looking at pathways to get at usability. So our content is organized such that you have a series of lessons that are clustered into a course, which is fairly straightforward, right? So here you have a basic finance course and a series of lessons about that course. Now that course can be accessed potentially through several different points within the application dashboard, right? So here's the first screen you would see, and we have what are called points of need and general sections. So if you are expecting a child, you can go straight to expecting a child. We also have content organized into what are called these military touch points. These are driven by the military training. So these are particular points in the service member's career that they would receive certain types of training. They're just referred to as touch points. So for example, when you are engaging in your initial entry training, that might be a good time to learn about how to read your leave and earning statement. If you were about to deploy, that might be a good time to read about deployment finances and different types of savings programs you can engage in. So these are specifically related to the points in their career, whereas these points of need are more related to their life status. So one of the questions we're interested in is, do these military touch points make sense to service members? And then are categories meaningful to the users, right? So how are they getting to the content if there's multiple pathways to get there? And so this is one of the things we really had to think about in advance, because we were specifically interested in how are people getting to their lessons. And so what we've decided to do is capitalize on the context and include that pathway information in context. So this is an example of a lesson statement. So I'm just going to go through this really quickly. So here we have our context within our lesson statement, and we have these groupings. And within this grouping, it is listing parts of the path that they use to get to this lesson. So this first grouping is the name of the course, right? So you have the type of the course and its name. And then the next grouping component is if it was in a group, which is our touch point, if it exists. And if they didn't go through the touch point, it won't say touch point. And so what this helps us get at is, for example, I'm going to just show an example of cash flow is a lesson that you get through this course called Basic Finance. Basic Finance can be accessed up here either through the search bar, which relatively few people have used so far, through this general section point of at the bottom, and also the military touch point initial entry training, right? So we're curious, when people are accessing cash flow, how are they getting there? Are they going through this general point of need, or are they going through initial entry training? And what we found in this case is that 74% of the time, they're accessing cash flow through this initial entry training instead of through this general tab. And this 10% is actually wrong. It should be 26. I forgot to update it. So much more often people are going through this initial entry training than they are the basic finance, and nobody's using the search bar. One thing to keep in mind is this might not be true of our end users. Again, these are financial counselors. They understand what touch points are already, and they're invested in knowing that the appropriate information is in each touch point. So we might see different pathways for service members, but just to make the point that this is the pattern we're seeing, and it's not just with the cash flow. We're seeing across a whole bunch of lessons that can be accessed in multiple pathways. They tend to go through the touch points as opposed to the general or point of need section. So this can be really helpful for us going forward to understand, do people understand the touch points? Are they getting to information through the touch points? How do people organize the content in their mind, right? To make sure that we have a hierarchy of where to find content that really makes sense to our users. Oh, I have a question here. What metrics help you determine effectiveness? Yeah, that's a good question. Effectiveness is a little bit harder to pin down than usability, right? Because what we really want to know is, are people getting the right information that they need for them and learning it? So we have a few plans going forward. We're implementing ways of capturing data about user behavior outside of the application. And then we are also looking at the profile information to get some information about what information should be useful to that user, and then are they going to the right content, right? So if they're a new recruit, are they going to initial entry training, and are they able to get to the right information that's useful for them? And then as we start to incorporate these additional measures outside of the application, that'll help us capture this effectiveness concept even better. Okay, and then building on this, more questions we ask. Again, status, rank, all that sort of thing. How many touch points do people tend to go to? This one's particularly interesting. One touch point might be interesting to me at any given point in time, right? I'm about to deploy, so deployment is especially useful to me. So do I just go to deployment, Or am I engaging in the application in a way that is, I'm exploring all the information and I don't want to know everything at once? And are there different types of users who do each of those things? And is there a way we can develop the application so that it can help guide people toward the next content that might be useful to them? And the last thing I'm going to talk about is what type of information is being accessed together at the same time. So what we're interested in here is whether we might see patterns in what types of lessons people are accessing. I'm saying accessing broadly because right now I'm not differentiating between experiencing and completing. In the future, I will. But is there some sort of content that goes together for users in a way that we don't predict? So for example, we might expect that deployment savings and deployment, finances, those go together. But there might be different types of information that goes together for the users that we don't necessarily predict. And so for that, we are using machine learning, which I put this here because, of course, it's a very important buzzword right now. So what I'm doing here to understand what is being accessed together is I'm using that actor name field and the object name field that I've already gone over to identify for each user, for every possible lesson, have they accessed this lesson, yes or no? And then using association algorithms, in this particular case, I'm using a priori to determine the relationship between lessons. So here's just a sampling of some of the things we found. And for us, some associations may be relatively more important than others. So for example, if you went through compound and simple interest, you're also likely to view cash flow. If you went through the lump sum calculator, you're also very likely to have gone through the GI comparison calculator. Now, this second point is probably due to proximity, right? So the lump sum calculator and the GI Bill comparison calculators are both found within a calculator section, right? So people are probably going into the calculators and opening a bunch of them at a time. That actually can be really useful information because it suggests that when people go into a course topic, they're likely to go through a bunch of things within that topic, even though these two concepts aren't inherently related to each other. People will sort of flip through everything within that section. What's unexpected, right, is that if you experience identity theft, you're also very likely to go to debt to income, right? So what that could suggest to us is, in this case, it may be less useful because it's probably a financial counselor that's checking out a bunch of things that they know are pain points to a service member. But we might see, for example, in the future, maybe people who go to expecting a baby are also really likely to go to marriage. And could that suggest something about whether we should group those two pieces of content together? And using this information, we can also really build on these network maps. So you could make this, right, more complex or more simple, just depending on the amount of information you want to know. So here with cash flow, a lot of things to predict whether you will go to cash flow. In this case, it's probably because people go to cash flow a lot, right? But some pieces of content are very likely to predict whether you'll go to cash flow, and some pieces of content are less so, right? So you can get an understanding of how people see the relationship between these different pieces of content by building these network maps. And that can be really useful for us going down the line when we're curious about, our content architecture, the hierarchy, are things grouped together in a way that makes sense to people? And are they grouped together in a way that makes sense to non-financial experts specifically? And again, here's just like interpreting the data, some things to think about, right? Are these lessons related because they're in a course together? Probably. Probably this will happen a lot. In those cases, it might be interesting to you. It might not be interesting to you. Are there associated lessons that are not clustered together within a course? So here we have a relationship between identity theft and debt to income, which are not anywhere located near each other within the application. So is there something about these two pieces of content that are either meaningful together to a user, or are they frequent pain points for the user that we can highlight? If you've gone to identity theft, maybe you'll be interested in debt to income, and can we recommend next lessons to the user? Those are some reason they might be meaningful in a way that you couldn't have predicted, and that maybe the users couldn't tell us in advance, right? Because when we sit down to end users, you know, nobody's ever said, you know, I think identity theft and debt to income are related to each other. But maybe there's something in their pattern of behavior that says something that we couldn't get just through talking to them, if we can talk to them. And we can use that to drive design or content decisions, right? So if two pieces of content are really related, maybe as we build out that content into the future, we can do that together. And then I'm getting to the end here. These last two slides, this is a sampling of questions we've looked at because they were interesting to us, but there's a lot more that we're planning to address. Search terms, what are people searching for? Do people like to play the games that are in there? Do they open the links? So are they leaving the application to get more information? And if so, which ones, right? So which links they open could be really important to tell us which pieces of content they think are important to learn more about, right? So that could help us develop that content more into the future. Do they play with the interactive elements, right? So within a lesson, you might have accordion menus or videos or different things you can swipe through. And does the amount of interaction relate to how much you use the application, right? So we have a lot of interactive elements to try to increase engagement, right? But do we then see that people who engage with the app more are likely to use it longer? And then can we use that to build in more engagement? Or maybe people don't like to and they just want the content to be short as possible. Then maybe the solution is to reduce the content and not include so much interactive elements. But knowing how people are interacting with the application can help us drive some of these decisions going forward. Okay, so just a brief takeaway. This first one, definitely some people pointed out, I saw in the questions here, you can get a lot of information out of the xAPI data. It's really rich with information. I showed you some examples of questions that we were interested in, but you know, the questions you are interested in might be different. So it's helpful to think in advance about what you're really interested in knowing, and then make sure that you can capture that data. So for example, we wouldn't have the pathway data that we're really interested in if we didn't think that through in the future and talk with our developers about how we could capture that and that we can include it in the context. So there's usually, within the many different ways you can extend an xAPI statement, a way to capture the data. You might just have to work through it in advance. And that could be really useful to make sure you get everything you need. And then this basic one, just basic sort of research, right? But even if you see a pattern of behavior, it's important to think through what might be driving that. Maybe it's something interesting to you, or maybe it's something mundane, right? Maybe location is what's causing something to happen. Maybe you don't want that to drive design in the future. Okay. So that's all I have to say. And I didn't know if you had any other questions I should address here, or if that's good. I see one at the bottom of analytics tools. I used MATLAB because I am familiar with it, because I was an academic in a previous life. So I downloaded a JSON file from our LRS that just had a series of xAPI statements, and I used MATLAB. It doesn't really matter, though. You could use Python or R, or like I said, if it's something that enough people are interested in, any of these things could easily be incorporated into an LRS. They just aren't in our case. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was great. I really appreciated learning from your app and what you're doing with xAPI and how you can learn more about your learners and your users and how you're grouping your content. So thank you for spending some time with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
No problem. We're going to jump right into some cohort business. We'll talk about where we should be now, what teams are doing, and give a chance for team leads to give some updates. So right now, we're at week 7. We're right in the middle, digging into details. So teams should be assigning tasks and iterating around this point. If you're not there yet, that's fine. It's never too late for cohort. It's fine if you're still getting to know each other, getting to know how you want to use xAPI as a team. You have lots of time to practice. We will be moving forward into demonstration and application in the next few weeks and preparing for our party in December. while I change my screen over to share with you the updates using GitHub, I wanted to give some clarification on what we're using GitHub for. So GitHub might be a new tool for some folks, and that's perfectly fine. We don't want to make anything more cumbersome or more difficult for anyone. There are two options on GitHub. There's the repository. So if you're not using authoring tools, if you're not doing any coding, you might not need a repository, and that's completely fine. If you are doing your own coding and you need a place to store it, the repository on GitHub might be a perfect place to do that. What we really use GitHub for as a team is to have your updates stored so that we can share what our teams are doing over time. What we've run into is sometimes when we're just using Slack or not another place to store some of the information about the teams, we're not able to talk about the work that you've accomplished in this cohort. With our GitHub Teams pages, we're able to store the updates, see what the teams have accomplished, and really share that out in a public-facing manner. So our priority is to get your updates in one place. Our secondary use of GitHub is the repository, but not everybody's going to need a repository. If you're using Storyline or an authoring tool, you might not need to store code, and that's completely fine. Also want to let you know if you need help submitting your updates or navigating GitHub, we're always there to help. Send me a message on Slack. If it's not something I can help with, we have Matt and Alex behind the scenes who are super tech gurus who can help you, and we want to be able to give that to you. With that, I'm going to move into some of the team updates. So if you are speaking on behalf of your team, be prepared when I mention your team, and then if someone is not able to speak, I'll read the updates that are submitted. If there's nothing submitted, we'll just go on to the next team. So up first is Team Agent. Is there anyone on the line to represent Team Agent? All right, since there's no update submitted and no one is on the line to speak, I'm going to go on to Team Alexa. Is there anyone to represent Team Alexa? So this week, they sent xAPI statements from a voice flow using their API block. They chose an IT workflow and began to design the actual voice interaction. They're not needing any support right now, and they're going to work on building a proof of concept in the next week, so that's really exciting. Team Atlassian Confluence, I'm not sure if they're on the line. They were prepping for DevLearn and not have any updates, but wanted to give a chance. All right. Team Beginners, is there anyone on the line to give an update about this team? All right, Team Captivate.js, Brian sent me a message. He might not be on the call right now, so I wanted to just share some updates. They have added some features to their emails and messages. They've had several folks have success uploading the content to an LMS and get the reporting in. Upcoming, they're going to work with Patty to understand why Canvas LMS is not working out of the box. That's a good resource. And then they're going to start the desktop module to auto-install Captivate Wrapper in published packages with very customizable parameters. Is anyone from Team Checky McChecklist able to share their update?
I don't see Chris on the line.
All right. We're going to go on to Team Dragon Stats, and J-Rock sent me his update before. Is Irina on the line to share the update?
You know what? You need to allow the mic connections. Which,
Aaron, can we allow mic connections?
Awesome. Mic should be enabled, everybody.
Mic should be enabled. Irina, are you on the line? All right, some accomplishments for the week with Dragon Stats was designing a magnetic Hall effect sensor, to use a smartboard to track Dungeons and Dragons miniature play and send statements from Arduino. And they decided about learning objectives, and next week they're going to conduct research about what is going on in the areas using Google Doc to track their research. I know Joanne said that she's going to be in a place that's too noisy to share her early childhood education updates. So some accomplishments for the week is that she set up and sent sample button statements successfully to Watershed. Yay, congratulations. Sent additional statements successfully to StormCloud. Still not having luck getting the simple button fires to work in Learning Locker, but we'll be getting some help in the next week. She's also going to work on getting a repository up and continue designing and coding the prototype screens. Is there anyone on Team HTML5 tracking available to give an update? Alrighty. Team Interactive Video. Is anyone on the line to give their update for the week? Team LlamaSoft, is anyone on the line to give their update for this week? Team Microsoft Teams, anyone available to give their update for this week? Team Online Labs? Team Pebble?
Kristen. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Kristen.
Okay. So this week we met and we, that link, the outline of objectives that's open to everyone, you can take a look. We mapped out all of the objectives that we had for our ebook and then kind of chunked them into sections. So next week we can divvy those sections out. And then one section we investigated a little bit more to try to figure out how to how the content should be structured. So it was a good storyboarding planning week for us.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Kristen. Team Query LRS, is anyone on the line to share your update? Team Scavenger Hunt?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm with Query LRS, and I can speak to what I'm doing with them.
Perfect.
So I haven't actually seen any announcements for a meeting on the team, but what I'm trying to do with it is I'm trying to send answers stored as variables from Storyline into the LRS and then query it back into a separate lesson as a variable so it can affect the storyline and have adapted learning via the variables. I've gone through a couple of videos this week where we're getting ready to send the variables stored as text options stored as numbers into SwarmCloud LRS is the one that I'm using. And so if anyone's interested in this type of thing of getting it back, right now I've put in a request to get xAPI so I can make some statements to get those variables back in. But I'm all completely new waters and I haven't seen a whole lot of activity in the team yet.
Perfect. Seems like there might be some help needed on Team Query LRS if anyone's interested. Team Scavenger Hunt, is there anyone on the call to give an update there? Team Storyline LMS. Oh, We are changing, closing this channel due to other business priority and not a lack of interest in the topic. So this team will be archived, and if there are folks on this team looking for a new project, just join any of the other projects and jump right in. Team Unity 3D Sandbox, is anyone available to give the update there?
Sure, this is Eric, if you can hear me okay.
Yep, can hear you, Eric.
Yeah, so we've proceeded into Unity 3D, the 3D authoring platform, and have a successfully tested environment that uses the GBL xAPI profile to send messages to Learning Locker. So now we're getting into the application side. What can we do once we're in there? And we've both been working. We've been working on some different modules that use Unity 3D features. I think there's a new update in the sandbox in the GitHub message board that talks a little bit more about what we're doing around navigation, as well as tracking who the actor is. So I think we've got a lot of really good activity there. I think it's at the top. Let's see. But I would say, yeah, there we go. Just physics. We're using the physics code that's built into Unity to detect when objects collide, which is a very unique way to track API statements, one object colliding with another. And I think we're looking at possibly doing another Unity 3D working session or hackathon, and check out the Slack page just so you can connect with when that might be. So anybody's welcome to join at any time, even though we're getting into some advanced Unity topics. It's never too late. Good for all levels. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. And I'm glad you're using profiles. Team Vimeo and xAPI. Is anyone on the call to give that update? All right. Team WordPress and Learn and Dash. So some updates for the week is they created an account with Rhapsody using the free demo account. Use those free resources. If you ever have questions about them, let me know. They quick tested from an HTML5 page to an LRS. They created a Rise course, and they tracked Rise pages. And those are all of the updates, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and while we're navigating back to the presentation, just want to remind you that every Wednesday at 5 would really appreciate having your updates submitted to GitHub. Let me know if you have any questions about how to do that. I'm in Slack as Jeff Jackson, and I can help you get connected to GitHub. All right, some good stuff to know is we're right here in this Adobe Connect every Thursday at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. The link is there. We also have a phone number that we share out. Next week, we're going to have the State of the Industry, a report from DevLearn with Megan. It's never too late to share cohort. So share with your colleagues, your friends, your peers who might be interested. You heard on the updates that there are teams who might need additional support. So don't let anyone miss out on this awesome learning opportunity. Our party, our xAPI party, is December 13th in Michigan, and it is online. To sign up in RSVP, the website is there. Again, and as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, email me, Jeff Jackson, at jjackson@torrancelearning.com. Tech coaches, I'm seeing some comments around tech coaches. We do have some folks that can help you with some things. Make sure you're using the main channel on Slack. There are lots of experts in there, and they're always willing to jump in and support you if you have any questions. With that, have an awesome Thursday. Get out there and continue making things. Have a great day.